My name is Malachi Dyer, and today we're going to explore the fundamental concepts of biomechanics through a comparison of some 200-meter runners. Let's start with scalar quantities. Scalars are measurements that have only magnitude. In other words, they're described by a numerical value alone. For example, in sports, we often measure distance, speed, and time. These are all scalar quantities because they don't involve direction. For instance, if a sprinter runs 100 meters in 10 seconds, the distance, 100 meters, and time, 10 seconds, are scalars. Now let's contrast that with vector quantities. Vectors have both magnitude and direction. This means that they provide a more detailed information about a movement. In sports, key vector quantities include displacement, velocity, acceleration, momentum, and weight. For example, if a sprinter runs 100 meters to the east in 10 seconds, their velocity is not just 10 meters per second, it's 10 meters per second to the east. Now, why are scalar and vectors so important in sports? Understanding the difference between scalars and vectors is essential for analyzing athletic performance. For instance, distance tells us how far an athlete has run, but displacement, which is a vector quantity, tells us how far they have run from a starting point in a specific direction. Similarly, speed, a scalar quantity, tells us how fast an athlete is moving, but velocity, a vector, tells us how fast they're moving and in what direction. Let's take an example of a 100-meter sprint. Now, the distance covered in a 100-meter sprint, a scalar vector, uh, a scalar quantity, but the displacement depends on the shape of the track. On a straight track, the displacement is also 100 meters. However, on a curved track, the displacement may be less as it is not in a straight line. The distinction is crucial for understanding the athlete's performance and forces acting on them. Now, let's move on to linear motion. Now, we can break this down into two terms. We've got angular motion and rectilinear motion. Angular motion is the movement around an axis, but still going in a straight line. Rectilinear motion is movement along a straight line, so this is more common in a lot of these sports, but certain body parts will be moving in angular motion in a lot of these sports as well. As we can see in this photo, the torso is performing rectilinear motion as it is going straight forward towards its target, but the ankle is performing angular motion as it is movement round an axis, round the joint. Now let's take a real world example of Usain Bolt doing a 200-meter sprint. Bolt's incredible acceleration in the first 50 meters allowed him to reach top speed quickly. His ability to maintain that speed through the curve into the final straight was the result of the biomechanical efficiency, including his stride length, frequency, and body positioning. Even though the track is curved, we can analyze Bolt's motion as a combination of linear segments to understand his performance. Now, let's dive into the biomechanics of a 200-meter sprint by comparing the mass of the three individuals, Usain Bolt, Anning, and myself. Now, Usain Bolt has a mass of 94 kilos. Anning has a mass of 61 kilograms. And I weigh 81 kilograms. From a biomechanical perspective, mass plays a critical role in momentum and force production. Momentum, which is the product of mass and velocity, is a key factor in sprinting. Higher mass, like Bolt's, can contribute to greater momentum, as these two are proportional, provided that the athlete can generate sufficient force to accelerate effectively. However, a higher mass also means greater inertia, which requires more force to overcome during the acceleration phase of the sprint. This is why athletes with a higher mass, like Bolt, often have incredible powerful muscle systems to generate the necessary force. Now, let's talk about muscle fibers involved in the 200-meter sprint. This event relies heavily on fast twitch muscle fibers, so this is type 1 muscle fibers, which are specialized for rapid, forceful contractions. These fibers are essential for explosive movements, such as the initial acceleration out of the blocks and maintaining high speeds throughout their race. Fast twitch muscle fibers have a high capacity for generating force quickly, but they fatigue faster than slow twitch muscle fibers or type 2A or type 2X muscle fibers. This makes them ideal for short, high intensity efforts like a 200-meter sprint. And now, the energy systems that are used through this perspective in a 200-meter sprint are predominantly powered by the anaerobic energy systems. This race begins with the ATP system, which provides immediate energy for the first few seconds. This system is crucial for the explosive start and initial acceleration. This system supports the high intensity effort required to maintain speed throughout the race without the use of oxygen, but can accumulate the buildup of lactate, contributing to the fatigue. Biomechanically, the interaction between mass, muscle fibers, and energy systems determines the athlete's performance. For example, Bolt's higher mass allows him to generate greater momentum, but it also requires more force to accelerate. His fast twitch muscle fibers are efficient, and anaerobic energy systems enables him to produce the necessary power to sustain high speeds, making him one of the greatest sprinters. In summary, the 200-meter sprint is a complex interplay of biomechanical factors, including mass, muscle fiber composition, and energy systems, all of which contribute to the athlete's ability to accelerate, maintain speed. Now, on this slide, we'll analyze distance time graphs for Usain Bolt, Anning, and myself during a 200-meter sprint. These graphs provide a clear visual representation of each athlete's speed and over the course of the race, offering a valuable insight into each of their performances. First, let's look at the times completing 200 meters. So, Usain Bolt has a time of 19.19 seconds, which is the world record pace. Anning has a time of 24.2 seconds, and I have 35.37 seconds, which is obviously a lot slower than the rest. If we were to plot these performances on a distance time graph, we'd see the distinct curves, each reflecting the athlete's speed and efficiency over the course of the race. Key features of distance time graphs include the steepness of the curve. The steepness of the curve at any point represents the athlete's speed and movement. A steeper curve indicates a higher speed, while a flatter curve indicates a lower speed. Bolt's graph would be the steepest overall, reflecting his speed throughout the race. Annie's graph would be less steep, and mine would be even the least steep, indicating the slower speed. Now, let's do a comparison of these speeds. Usain Bolt, his graph would show a consistently steep curve, reflecting his ability to maintain the high speed over the entire 200 meters. This is a result of his exceptional biomechanics, including powerful muscle contractions, efficient energy use, and optimal running mechanics. Anning, her graph would be less steep than Bolt's, but steeper than mine, reflecting her ability to maintain a good speed, though not as high as Bolt's. This is due to her lower mass and efficient running mechanics. However, myself, my graph will be the least steep, reflecting my lower speeds compared to Bolt and Anning. This is influenced by factors such as less explosive power, less efficient biomechanics, and a lower capacity to maintain speed over time. Now, the biomechanical insights from the graph include energy efficiency, so maintaining that steep curve on the distance time graph. It requires a lot of energy use, so Bolt's ability to sustain high speeds is partly due to his efficient use of his anaerobic energy systems, which provide quick bursts of energy without the oxygen use. It also depends on mass and momentum because Bolt's is higher, which contributes to his greater momentum. It also requires a force to maintain his speed. His powerful muscle contractions and efficient biomechanics allow him to generate that and sustain that force necessary throughout the race. If we compare these graphs efficiently, Bolt's graph is steep and consistent, reflecting his elite speed and biomechanical efficiency, but Anning's, as we've said, is moderately steep, reflecting her good speed and efficient biomechanics, though not at Bolt's level, but my graph is less steep, reflecting my lower speed and less efficient biomechanics compared to the elite athletes. So in summary, bringing it all together, distance time graphs provide a clear visual representation of an athlete's speed in a 200-meter sprint. By analysing these graphs, we can better see this understanding of the biomechanical factors that contribute to the differences in performance, such as stride mechanics, energy efficiency, and momentum. Now, on this slide, we'll explore the acceleration and deceleration phases of a 200-meter sprint and how they influence an athlete's performance. These phases are critical to understanding the biomechanics of sprinting as they determine how quickly an athlete can reach top speed and how well they can maintain it. Now, we've got our acceleration phase first. The acceleration phase occurs at the start of the race, typically within the first 20 to 30 meters. During this phase, the sprinter generates maximum force to overcome inertia and reach their top speed. Let's break this down biomechanically. Overcoming inertia is breaking down the resistance of an object to any change in its velocity. To accelerate, the sprinter must apply an unbalanced force to the ground, which propels them forward, and then this requires explosive power of the muscles, particularly the glutes, hamstrings, and quadriceps. Now, the deceleration phase occurs towards the end of the race, typically after 100 to 150-meter mark. During this phase, the sprinter begins to slow down due to fatigue. Now let's examine the biomechanics again. Now the fatigue factors of deceleration is primarily caused by muscle fatigue and energy depletion. As the race progresses, breakdown of glucose leads to the accumulation of lactate, contributing to muscle fatigue. Now, this is because in the acceleration phase, they are primarily using the ATP system. Now, this is without oxygen, so they don't need to breathe or anything like that because it's without oxygen. It's only using glucose as energy and glycogen. Okay. Biomechanical changes. So as fatigue sets in, the sprinter's running mechanics may deteriorate. This includes a reduction in stride length, a stride frequency, leading to slower speeds, less efficient ground contact resulting in energy loss with each step, increased bouncing, which wastes energy that could be used for forward motion. Now, let's compare myself, Bolt, and Anning. Bolt's acceleration phase is explosive, allowing him to reach the top speed quickly. His deceleration phase is minimal, as he can maintain his speed and form under fatigue, thanks to his powerful muscles and efficient biomechanics. Now we move on to Anning. She has a strong acceleration phase, but may experience more deceleration towards the end of the race due to less explosive power and energy efficiency compared to Bolt. Now, my acceleration phase is slower, and I experience significant deceleration as fatigue sets in. This is due to less force production, less efficient